let's just hop right into the science here. So what I prepared for you today is the answer to two very important questions when it comes to the chemosensory loss that we see with COVID-19. So the first question I'm going to ask and answer, is this a true taste loss? So there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical about whether true taste is actually lost with COVID-19. I'll explain that in a minute. And then, of course, the other very burning question is whether this smell and perhaps taste loss is actually present. So sorry here. So so why taste and smell loss confusion? So one of the reasons that COVID-19, people are a little skeptical about whether there might be genuine taste loss is because as early as 100 years ago, people who studied taste and smell loss were often reporting that smell loss is very common, but taste loss is very rare. So we see this among the earliest writings, which was very nicely summarized by Beverly Cowart in one of her landmark articles about taste dysfunction. So in the early days of the pandemic, there was a lot of skepticism about whether this taste on the tongue is actually lost. And, normally the way that we approach these kinds of questions when we're looking at genuine taste loss is when we use nose clips to really eliminate all of the impact of the nose and just look at what happens on the tongue. And so in the early days of the pandemic, a lot of the taste reports, the losses of taste loss were through self-report. And people are often confused when they say they have taste loss, they really mean that they have this taste smell confusion. They can't taste their food. And so one of the ways around understanding whether this is a genuine loss of taste or not is through direct measures. So actually having somebody taste something, nose clips on ideally, and report on the sense of taste. And so this led us to do a meta-analysis. And so a meta-analysis is when we gather together all of the articles that are published about a certain topic. And it's quite an extensive thing to do. And you'll see here that we have commemorative mugs that say, "I survived the COVID-19 chemosensory meta-analysis." So we gathered together all of these papers and we read them all. We read them all and we extract all the information. And so we did this for 241 papers that were published since the beginning of the pandemic. And these papers report data from over 100,000 people. Now, the very important thing here is if all these papers are from self-report, well, that doesn't really help us all that much. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't really inform. So is there a cumulative literature on the direct measures of taste loss? And what are those papers telling us? So that was the goal of our meta-analysis. So this is the result of this large meta-analysis we did. So as I said, lots of skepticism and controversy. Is taste loss real? So each of these dots, these colorful dots, turquoise on the top and pink on the bottom, represents a single study. And the size of the study is, in the number of people that participated in the study, is roughly the size of the dot. And along the x-axis is the prevalence of taste loss in that particular study. So, for instance, a study down here would be reporting no taste loss, whereas one over to the far right would be reporting 100% taste loss. And these dots in the middle report the average of all of these studies taken together. So when we use self-report, what we see is on average, there's about maybe a 40% people reporting taste loss. As I said, reason to be skeptical about that because it's self-report. People might be confused. But when we look at the direct measure, so studies where people actually measured things directly, we see that a little bit more, maybe just shy of 50% of people are reporting genuine taste loss. Now, I should just make the point that these studies were done often in the earlier days of the pandemic. And these direct measure studies are not perfect. So a lot of times investigators had their chemosensory labs were shut. And so they were having participants mix solutions at home. Not perfect. But if we take this information in the aggregate, we see that there is a really very clearly that taste on the tongue is a genuine loss with COVID-19, which suggests that the mechanisms that cause this taste loss in the nose are similar or the same as the ones that cause the loss of the sensory cells on the tongue. So it's a really powerful tool to understand what is exactly going on with this particular attack on the sensory system. So the other thing you're going to notice is that there's a lot of disagreements among these studies. My gosh, they range from 0 to nearly 100%. So why is there so much difference among all these particular studies? Now, for sure, they're conducted internationally among people all over the world. So there could be differences in geography, strains of SARS-CoV-2, all of those things. And so part of what we're hoping to unpack is why there's such a tremendous range in the losses among these different studies. So what is going on? So we have a little piece of this puzzle we're able to do when we look at these studies more carefully. And so a piece of this puzzle is that these studies were done on people of different ages. And so Valentina Parma is going to unpack this for you from the kids' perspective, but we're going to take a look here at the actual situation with regards to age. So if we take all of these studies, so each dot on this graph is an individual result from an individual study, and we look and we plot the average age of the participant for every study. So on the x-axis, younger people to the left, older people on the right, and the prevalence on the y-axis, larger numbers means more people are reporting taste loss. And we can see here that, boy, these middle adult years are really the prime for the taste loss. So people in their late 20s, 30s, early 40s, these are people that are really experiencing the taste loss with COVID-19 the most dramatically, which is not to say that children, the younger groups, and the oldest groups don't have some degree of taste loss, because it's apparent that they do. It's just that it seems to be particularly the case for the middle age groups. So is there a biological mechanism for this? Now, some people have speculated with some degree of evidence that the receptor that pulls SARS-CoV-2 into the sensory cells and supporting cells is not expressed very much in very early and very late life. So essentially the drawbridge that pulls SARS-CoV-2 into the cells may not be fully open in these age groups. So that's one explanation. We don't know exactly why that is, but it's it's at least an explanatory hypothesis. Now, so I think that you'll agree that we've answered the first question, is it a true taste loss? And the answer to that question is yes, there is a true taste loss. Now, but the next question is this transitory? So, we can't say whether or not it's permanent. I mean, we've only been facing this for 18 months, maybe 18 months or so. So there's no way to know exactly how this is all going to unfold. So we can't make any claims about that. But what we can know about is, are those people that we had, that we studied in the early part of the pandemic who had reported losing their sense of taste and smell, how are they doing? And what is going on with them? So to unpack this question, we're calling on the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research. So as Bob mentioned, this is a group that is led by Valentina Parma, our very own Valentina Parma. And it's an organization of about 600 or 700 chemosensory scientists in approximately 60 countries worldwide. And the very first thing that we did as a group was we launched an internet-based survey to get people to talk about their symptoms with COVID-19. So I'm going to be reporting to you on data where people answered this first survey in the early days of the pandemic. And then these same people were then resurveyed 6 months or longer afterwards to find out how they're doing. So we're hoping to be able to get a sense of how sort of if this is sticking with people or if people are getting better. So let's just take a look here. So what I'm showing you here is a big pie chart. And so we're just looking at the 1,468 people who, when we first asked them in the early days, that told us that they had COVID-19 and that they had lost both their sense of taste and smell. So these are 1,468 people that started off in a situation where they had lost their sense of taste and smell. Their earliest symptoms. So that's this S1 business here. That's the first survey we did. So then when we went back and resurveyed, so we asked the same questions, how are you doing? And how are you doing with your sense of taste and smell? And so what we see in these littler pies here is that when we go back and ask people, we find that 38.5%, that's that white piece of the pie here, say that they still have smell and taste loss. And we quantified that a little bit for people so that they have not regained their full function of taste and smell loss. So when we asked people too, some people, about 19%, said that their taste was doing okay, but that they still had smell loss. And then we see that this idea that you can lose taste and still have a perfect sense of smell or have a recovered sense of smell, very few people have that experience, which is not to say it's never happened, and some people do report that, but it's relatively rare. So just to recap here, we see that when we go back and we resurvey these same 1,400 people, we see that 283 of them report they still have some degree of smell loss. 565 report that they have taste and smell loss, and 48 report that they have taste loss. And so when we're asking about persistent loss of taste and smell as the answer to our second question, the answer looks to be like yes. Now, the other thing, and this is going to be unpacked for you in more detail in later talks, because this is important. One of the aftermaths that we see with COVID-19 is not that people necessarily just lose their sense of smell, but that they also they develop parosmia, which is the distortion in the sense of smell, or phantosmia. So let me just say what this is. So parosmia is that distortion. So for instance, let's just say you had a beautiful meal this morning of, whatever, raspberries and yogurt. So the raspberries are not going to have the beautiful smell of raspberries. They might smell decayed or tainted and be very unappealing. Or let's just say the coffee this morning. So the coffee, instead of having that beautiful coffee aroma, going to smell more like garbage or something that's very unappealing. So phantosmia, smelling something that's not there, very common for people to report the smell of burning in the absence of actually having any source of that particular odor. So here's the message, though. When we resurveyed those same 1,468 people and we asked them about these symptoms, nearly half of the people who had reported some problems with their sense of smell reported that they had this parosmia, and 25% reported that they had phantosmia. So the message here is that it's really kind of a double whammy. It's not only that these senses are lost, but that they're distorted or causing problems in ways that people, might not necessarily, if you've never had this happen to you, really understand and be able to respect for the difficulties that it causes. So if we just move over here to see if we've answered these two questions that we started with. So the first question is it a true taste loss? Are people just confused? Answer, probably not. We do not still have those 18 studies I showed you, not perfect. Lots of room for improvement here, but I think we can really reject the hypothesis that it's just merely a confusion. So taste loss on the tongue is a real thing. So the other question is smell and taste loss transitory? Yeah, so about 40% of the people that we're seeing in our survey report that they're just fine at the end of the 6-month or longer period. They're okay. They feel that they've completely regained the senses that they lost. And certainly many of us have talked to people for whom that's true. They feel better. They're back to some kind of normal. But the other message is that 60% of these people are still reporting that they have problems. So there's a lot of caveats with this type of survey, as there are with all of these internet-based surveys. It applies to the people who like to do internet-based surveys, which is, not maybe all the people in the world. So this really needs a much more careful and a much more representative analysis so that we understand the true extent of the problem. And also, what we've been doing here, I'm proud of what's been done, but I would also have to say we must acknowledge that it's crude. And so we really need to measure with these direct measures much more in depth and more detailed so that we can try to quantify how much is lost. And my guess is that when we do actually get a chance to quantify, there's going to be even more surprises in store, in the sense that for people who sometimes report that they're fully recovered, my guess is that they may not really be fully recovered. And so I think there are some surprises ahead in that regard. So what are we doing about this? So what are we planning to do about this? So Monell, as part of an opportunity afforded us by the NIH, recently submitted what's called a P50 grant, which is a large grant that's aimed to understand clinically relevant health problems. And that has several components. It's a very large scale project, and there's lots to talk about there. But the thing that I'm just going to mention to you at the moment that we have planned is to actually take taste tissue from the tongues of people who have taste loss and who report that they have no taste loss, who sort of went through COVID-19 and who we measure and find that their taste is recovered, that they have taste, or people that do report they still have taste loss, and then people who were never ill with COVID-19. We're going to take the tissue from the tongue. We have sufficient approvals to do that. And then we looked at those cells very carefully using a method called single cell RNA-seq. And so what we're trying to do is match what we find when we look at the tissue with what the people are telling us about their sense of taste, so that understand what's compromised here. It could be that there's problems in the central processing of what's happening on the tongue, but honestly, I think the tongue is the first place to look. So we're really interested in looking to see what happens when these taste cells are maybe attacked and what's going on. This is the first road to being able to understand how to fix it. So I just want to wrap up and say, just acknowledge some of the people that all made this happen. A lot of this meta-analysis work was driven by Mackenzie Hannum and Vince Ramirez, who did a lot of terrific work on the taste loss. And I also just want to say that this has been a really beautiful effort on the part of many, many people at Monell who've participated and shown interesting gifts in a lot of important ways. And so it's really been, it's obviously been a dark cloud the last 18 months, but it's really been the silver lining, is learning about all of the gifts and talents of my colleagues. So with that, I'm very happy to wrap up and take your questions.